now. I was with Platte Woods for 20 years, and then our son and daughter-in-law and grandkids went over to Pine Ridge, and so we joined them there, and I'm on the session there. Janet mentioned a lot of the background, so I'll just say I've been lucky enough, was sent by Ford Motor Company when I was working for them over to Ford of Europe to do some consulting work in England, Germany, and Spain. And I've been doing health advocacy work for 40 years and fairly pure community organizing for about 17. I was on the United Methodist, the Missouri Conference's social justice team, so that's kind of my background. And so with that, what I'm going to do is the impossible. I'm going to take you through 15 hours of medical student lectures in 15 minutes, okay? So it's going to be fast, it will be high level, but I'm going to give you the takeaways right up front.
Rex, we got one quick piece before you get to that.
Yes, okay. Sorry, I jumped the gun.
Yeah, not a problem.
Okay.
Just quickly, Clay and Platte County have right at 360,000 people, all right? There are 18 communities or municipalities in each, so there are 36 municipalities, all right? We have an interesting mix of people. Most of the people are white. The 87% plus in Clay, 79% plus in Platte. Black people, a little over 5% in Clay, 6.4% in Platte. Hispanics are about 5.9% in the Clay, and they are about 7% in Platte. There are other groups, Native Americans have smaller percentages and so on. We could go into that when we've got more time. Just quickly, when you see a community that has that many municipalities in it, and that kind of a population, that tends to make it very pluralistic. One might even say fragmented. That is, these folks here don't know what those folks are doing. One of the questions is, how do you approach the common good in a highly, let's use the word plural, in a highly pluralistic area such as we are in? A basic way to do that has been through broad-based, down on the ground, community organizing that typically takes place through institutions. I mean by that congregations, nonprofits, unions, you know. In other words, that whole sector we tend to call the civic or the voluntary sector. You want to recruit people out of those to participate, and in conversation and research and the rest to discover what indeed is the common good of this area, and then begin to work for it. So you're not caught in all this splintering that I've lived here in Platte. I lived in Platte County 28 years, Clay County the last 12. And my experience would be one in which this is a highly fragmented area. So what we want to do is look at the question, how can we, pulling together people out of a range of institutions, we don't limit that. We're not Republican, we're not Democrat, all right? We're not liberal, we're not conservative. We're trying to find out what is the common good and get people concerned about it so they can go to work on it. And then we come to Rex.
That's great. And Gary and I actually at one point were hoping to do this together, but Gary's mom's been ill, and so I'm going to kind of wing it here. But I can tell you that having the previous health director for Clay County, it gives us a lot of access to and understanding of the data up here. So with that, let me get started here. And who's got the shepherds hooked? Are you the timer? Okay, good.
She volunteered for that.
We'll see.
Yeah, yeah. Particularly after I gave a talk that was too long. So I'm going to give you the 3 takeaways right now, and then you'll see whether or not I convince you of these 3 takeaways as we run through this. First is, guess what, folks? We've been falling behind other high income as well as many moderate income counties in regards to life expectancy and quality of life. 2, we actually know an awful lot of the causes of that, and they're human made, so we can fix them. And 3, we actually have some experience and wins of doing just that when we focus on the common good and work together. I love this quote from Samuel Clemens, but I've reworded it slightly. The most important days in your life are the day you're born and the days you find out why, because I think at different stages we continue to learn and find new ways that we're called to the work that we're doing. So why is medical education changing so much, and why do communities need to change? Well, there's huge evolution of the science of understanding disease and injury causation. This material is so important it's being added to national boards so that doctors can't get their licenses unless they understand this. The millennials, and particularly Generation Z, are becoming more and more interested in community and advocacy. And we basically can't assure that our patients have good health outcomes if we don't deal with the root causes. We can't just suppress symptoms anymore. So this is a slide from Duke University, and you'll see the rapid growth in the last 10, 15 years there in regards to publications on what we call social determinants of health. I don't like that term. I prefer social, political, economic influencers of health, but the standard in the literature is social determinants of health. And you can see the first reference was back in 1961. Now you may be looking at this and say, well, what happened in 2022? Well, this is just for half the year, so it actually is continuing to grow. One of the important points of this is that what this literature is showing us is that between 80 and 90% of the things that we can modify in regards to how long we're going to live and the quality of our life are actually in these factors. They're not in access and treatment with injuries and illnesses. Brian McLaren actually was speaking here back in 2007 and then at St. Paul's, and he gave this talk about why are we scared sometimes to talk about politics. And as you think about this, he defined 2 problems. The first is, what do we mean by politics? And if we mean by politics dirty, partisan, divisive, dishonest, power-grabbing attempts to make us winners and them losers, then no, that's not what we're about here tonight, I hope. But if we define politics as the way groups of people organize their lives together, and I think that's absolutely why we're here. Second problem is congregations, labor unions, concerned citizens aren't or shouldn't be political. Now, I would say we need to really be careful about partisanship, but political, by that second definition, I think we actually are called to be. So I believe in individual responsibility, but I believe even more in collective responsibility. And if you think about this, if we only focused on individual responsibility, we know people need to drink safe water, so we would just tell everybody, boil your own water. We wouldn't provide it publicly, even though it's cheaper and easier. We wouldn't inspect those that are selling it and regulate it to make sure. And yes, we have breakdowns like we had in Flint with lead, but these things can be addressed collectively. So I think that's the common good, as Tex said, versus individual responsibility. And we're really focused on individual responsibility in this nation. So how have we been doing on life expectancy? It may surprise many of you that even though we were in the low teens, 20s back in 1960, we have dropped to 46. So there's 45 other countries in the world right now that live longer than we do. And it's projected by 2040 and this data has been pretty accurate on these projections as we've been going along, that we're going to drop to 64th. So you can see that bottom line there, the black line there, where we're not doing very well in this country, and we continue to go down. And with COVID, we actually dropped even farther behind these other countries. So Samuel Clemens also said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. Often it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. So a lot of us know for sure that we've got good health in this country when we in fact don't. So we looked at risk factors, and we're all familiar with smoking and high blood pressure and cholesterol and diabetes, and you can predict how many people are going to die in a population very accurately year to year. But what we found out in Kansas City, Missouri, taking these national risks, and we looked at it, and somewhere between 1 out of 2 and 1 out of 3 of our deaths every year are due to these 6 factors. Wow. So some of you, as we break out later in the group, will be talking about some of these issues in regards to race and education and poverty, etc. But this doctor can bail all he or she wants if we don't fix the hole in the boat. So we actually have, just a few miles apart, 2 zip codes in Kansas City, Missouri, with a 19-year difference in life expectancy. I love this quote: "The human eye is a wonderful device. With a little effort, it fails to see even the most glaring injustice." And that's what our country is not seeing right now. So as we think about this, most of us have been engaged with and support charity. I love these definitions in this contrast, because charity deals with the effects of injustice. Justice deals with the root causes. Charity focuses on the needs of individuals. Justice focuses on changing systems. Charity does not challenge the status quo, whereas justice challenges the status quo. And so if you want to look at this pictorially, something what we call the river parable in public health, where if we were helping people that had fallen in here, and eventually we think, well, there's so many people that are drowning and coming to us, we've got to go up around the bend and figure out what's going on. So as you go around each bend of the river, you go into kind of charity and individual needs, but eventually you get further upstream. And I'll give you a handout with all of these slides, and I can give you actually the slides with the PowerPoint if this is helpful for you at any time. Dr. Block, former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, talks about adverse childhood experiences maybe the greatest unaddressed public health threat of our time. And why is that? Well, it turns out, and these are kind of the top 10 that are the most commonly researched in the literature here, but if you think about it, all these different conditions, if we fixed our adverse childhood experiences, like a lot of the nations that live much longer than we have addressed these and have lower of these rates, the amount of those conditions that would go away is that black cloud in the middle. Those would be gone. So we wouldn't be even having to experience or treat them. We'd cut our cancers and heart diseases by a fourth. All these different factors would go down. I'll just focus on divorce for a second. So it's interesting, UCLA and RAND did a major study and looked at the states that had raised minimum wage. And for every dollar that the minimum wage was raised, divorce rates went down by 7 to 15% over the next 2 years. So think about those changes. Also, states that do both earned income tax credits and child tax credits, folks in those states live 2 years longer than states that don't do those two. So if we think about adverse childhood experiences, about a third of us in this country have 0, about half have 1 to 3, and about 1 out of 6 of us have 4 to 10. But in some of our communities, some of our census tracts, even some of our zip codes here in the Northland, we actually have closer to 50% of the folks that are in that category of 4 to 10. And if you look at the difference between folks that had no adverse childhood experiences as growing up and those that had 7 or more, you can see all those factors that have increased. Their chances of becoming addicted to nicotine and smoke, their chances of having heart disease, 19 times as likely to attempt suicide if they've had those higher levels of adverse childhood experiences. Robert Wood Johnson, University of Wisconsin, have put together a good way of looking at this factor, and these programs and policies cause health factors, which then cause health outcomes. And you'll see here that about a third of the difference between different counties and life expectancy in the country can be explained by health behaviors. About a sixth of it is by clinical care, but literally 3 times as important as clinical care is these social economic factors. So we've had this river parable, and we understand unhealthy behaviors lead to disease and injury and lead to death. But if we ask why, and we go further upstream, it's our isms, our biases and beliefs lead to harmful policies and practices which put our communities on life support. So if you think about it, we can have emergency rooms and hospitals and clinics and health education, and we can spend twice as much as any other country in the world per person and still be falling behind 45 other countries. Why? Because we don't have the power and leadership as we're starting to build in this room. We then have to come together on policy changes, and we end up having to actually change our narrative of even about how we talk about ourselves and our problems. And these then lead to healthier communities, and ultimately these are the real drivers of change. Now I could spend the whole time just on this slide, but I'll just throw this out here to show you that how we get health equity in a community involves everything from funding and working with business and social movements. The way that we keep people from falling into the water or getting them out before it gets down to the rapids and over the falls is through social movements. And that's where the IAF has a particular expertise. So as we think about social political influencers of health, all of these are those factors. They all put stress on people, which then create unnecessary disease, illness, and injury and well-being problems. But again, ask about why? Well, it turns out that we've got problems with power, and for some reason this is really lagging funny, power and wealth imbalances. And then ultimately our social structures. So now it's actually going to go forward. Okay. It's taking your role, Nikki. So let's see if I can get it stabilized here. Okay. There we are. So the tree on the left, you can see all these conditions that we're experiencing in this country above all these other developed countries. And why? Because our roots aren't healthy and our trunk isn't healthy. So if we look at this, as we're starting to struggle with this issue, we've got to focus on these roots, and any of these roots we could be improving on, and we as a group may decide to work on, or it may be something else. But what we do know is that we've also got to have the trunk, because what's in the roots, if it can't get up to the other part of the tree, it's not going to work. And that's where our organizing networks and our local leadership is important. I'm not going to read all these definitions to you, but I do like and say that I don't use the term health disparities other than say why I don't, because they're really too value neutral. I prefer health inequities, and I like Dr. Whitehead's now 40 years of this definition. It's differences in population health status, mortality rates that are systemic, patterned, unfair, unjust, and actionable, as opposed to random or caused by those that become ill. And if we're moving towards health equity, it's a fair distribution of these resources so that people can achieve well-being. Rawls, in his theory of justice, talks about, you'll know if you have a just community if you would have been willing to have been born into any family in your community. Then you would have had a fair shake. So as we think about this, the difference between just equality above and equity has to adjust to the individual's needs. So when I think about social justice comes from truth and power. And we can provide you all the medical and public health data, but unless we're organizing, we don't get justice. And so we can bring in the chamber, we can bring in More Squared, we can bring in IAF, all of our congregations. If we join these together, then we can move towards justice, and often we do that through social movements. So, power is the ability to achieve a purpose. Whether or not it's good or bad depends on the purpose. And many of us have heard the term power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And you may even remember that that comes from Lord Acton. But notice the quote isn't the same. He said power tends to corrupt. The way we keep power from corrupting is having a broad-based group that works on issues together and works on these agendas. One of the handouts that you've got is on the three faces of power, and I'm not going to go into this because of time, but the handout is actually excellent. I'm just going to focus on these three levels. You can win on individual issues, or you can actually start to develop power so you even set the agenda of what gets discussed and thought about and voted on. And then you also change the way that we actually talk about our issues and concerns and our narrative. How do we perceive the problems? And this is just an example where we know that with voter access, these states up here that have better voter access live longer than these states down here that don't have as strong a voter access. And you'll notice that Missouri is down here as one of the 4 worst states in regards to voter access, and we're also in the bottom 4th in regards to life expectancy. So as we move forward to advocacy and types of frameworks, there's awareness, like some of you are getting tonight. Some of you are moving into, well, okay, it's not enough to be aware, you've got a will to make a change, or we actually take action. And we can focus on the general public, we can focus on influencers, like you in this group, as well as some of you may even be decision makers. And I'll close with 2 quotes. John Lewis, my philosophy is very simple. When you see something that's not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble. Good trouble, necessary trouble. Or someone ought to do it, but why should I? Someone ought to do it, so why not I? Between these 2 questions lie the whole centuries of moral evolution. So this is a moral movement. So my takeaways, we've fallen and are continuing to fall further and further behind other high and moderate income nations. We know most of the reasons for this decline since they're human-made problems and people can fix them. And we have lots of examples where communities organize for the common good and reverse these trends. Your homework, if you would want, on the back of your handout, this is a little YouTube video. It's less than 5 minutes. You can take a look at. George Takei is the narrator, so you don't worry about trying to figure out who it is. It's Captain Zulu from Star Trek, so you don't worry about it. But I give you this because sometimes this is the kind of thing you can share with somebody else and get most of what I talked about across in just a little video.
Yeah. This
So
handout.
it's coming around. It's coming around.
Some of you haven't been to a Rex Archer presentation before.
So with that, as we're passing around the handouts, comments, questions, challenges, disagreement, that's part of good community, is our ability to respect each other and have different views.
And Joe is going to
Yes, Joe.
lead us in that.
First off, some of the statistics are astounding to me.
I'm sorry, what?
Some of those statistics are astounding to me.
Yeah.
Having been a clinician in a variety of settings in the Northland. and the age disparity between two neighboring zip codes. That really got my attention. So I guess I'm up. Stories and sharing. We're going to get that about 10 minutes total, 5 minutes each way, where you do kind of a one-on-one. I guess you will divide us up accordingly.
Well, they can do it themselves. That'll work quickest.
What, and these are the topics to consider. What do you love about the Northland and Kansas City? Very simple. What challenges have you seen or experienced recently in your own personal lives, profession, church, etc.? And if you can, what one or two specific things would you most want to see changed? And lastly, why are those things important to you?
If you can, get with a person in the room you know least.
It's almost
I was gonna
everybody.
say, you're handy and I know what it is.
Jennifer,
Yes.
do you think we could write those questions up on the
Grab
board or
somebody.
something?